Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in beautiful San Diego. Thank you so much for subscribing to this channel. Please make sure that you like the video you've just watched and consider making a contribution on our app or on our website. It's really easy to do, and thank you in advance for that support. It does make a difference. The courage to look and the inspiration to change. And whether that is looking at our lives individually and what's going on in our families and in our personal world, or whether that is looking at the larger world, the courage to look and the inspiration to change. The Unity Center is known in the New Thought movement as a center that really is on the very leading edge of bringing our spirituality in an engaged way to not only transform our individual lives, but to inspire each and every one of us in this teaching to do what we can do to heal our world with love. And so we come together with a dual purpose, I think, each time we do come together. We come together to make sure that we are continuing to go do our own inner work and to grow and to become deepened in our faith and more practiced in our spiritual teachings and technologies, but to also not end there, to also keep our hearts open to where are we being called to make a difference? Where are we being called, whether it's in the classroom with children that we teach, or whether it's opening a shop on Etsy and tithing some of the proceeds to Black Lives Matter, or whether it is riding a bicycle marathon to raise funds for Alzheimer's. There's so many ways that we are invited to lend our might, to lend our heart, to lend our consciousness to doing our piece. We can't do it all, and we don't have to do it all, and we're not going to all do the same thing. But to lend a bit of our heart, a bit of our soul, a bit of our consciousness to making this a more just, more peaceful, and more loving world, not only for ourselves and not only for our families that we hold near and dear, but to those that are far removed from us or very different than us. It takes courage to look. I'm reminded when I think of the idea of it taking courage to look, there's a funny part of me that likes to watch psychological thrillers. I don't watch too many of them, but a certain kind of psychological thriller I like to watch. But if there's anything gory or violent in it, I can't look. I hide. I bury my head either in the pillow or if I'm sitting next to John, into his arms. And the family cracks up because they say, why do you even do any of this when you won't look? And sometimes I have to even close my ears because sometimes the sounds are just too expressive of what's going on. It takes courage to look, but that's a silly kind of example. I think of my time in India. I think of my time in Malawi, Africa. I think of my time in South Africa. And the courage it took to look and to take in what was all around me. The courage to do that. I think of the courage that it takes to stay informed. I remember a number of years ago when the best-selling, I think it was on the New York Times bestseller list, Half the Sky was written by two journalists. And this book chronicled the lives of many young girls and women around the world who are either sold into sex slavery or gang raped as a form of war torture. And it was talking about their plight and the importance of laws being changed, awareness being brought. And I remember reading the book and sobbing and talking to John a little bit about it. And he said, honey, you don't have to read the book. And I said, yeah, you're right. I don't have to read the book. But they're living this life. And I can somehow maybe be a part, even if it's just to be aware of it and to do something in my prayer time and to speak about it. Who am I to just say, because it's so painful to look, I'm just going to close the book and not take it in. And so it takes, I believe, great awareness and mindfulness and presence, great courage to look and to stay informed, but to also do it grounded in our spiritual understanding and grounded in our faith. It takes courage to look in our own lives, doesn't it? If you think about what's at the heart of much of therapy, psychological therapy, it is the courage to look at one's life, whatever the problems are that one's facing. There's life coaching that people go into usually when their life is working pretty well and they want it to work better. Therapy oftentimes is somebody enters therapy because there's something really not working well in their life. Maybe there's an addiction, maybe there's something very painful going on in the family, some personal trauma that needs to be healed. And it takes courage in that therapy to look squarely at what that is. I think of the recovery movement, and a significant part of recovery is the admission of behaviors that have been harmful to self and others, and the courage it takes to look at that, because we know that we cannot change anything that we're not willing to look at. I think our pandemic was made worse than it would have otherwise been because there were not enough eyes looking at the highest level, making the highest decisions, looking at what was going on so action could be taken. There's a bit of a dilemma that we live in within our spiritual teaching, and that is that there is a shadow side of any teaching that emphasizes happiness and brightness and lightness at the exclusion of understanding that there is the other, Because what happens is we can find ourselves avoiding or denying or pulling back, saying, I'm not going to look. In The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism, Harvey writes about the idea that there are inner saboteurs that we have that keep us from looking because we cannot change what we are unwilling to see. And we cannot change mindfully what we are not well informed about. He says there are three main inner saboteurs that either keep us from waking up and looking at all, or cause us to feel apathetic, or leave us feeling paralyzed. These are the three. See if you can relate to them at all, and see if you can relate to them either in your personal life and something that you know you're needing to look at, but you kind of haven't been, or when you look at the world. See if you can relate to these. He says the first saboteur is denial and disbelief. Denial and disbelief. Have you experienced any of that in the last couple of years? The more informed you've been about world events and affairs? Nod your head. I've had my moments of denial and disbelief, like, really? Really? Honestly and truly? Really? Denial and disbelief. It's just not happening, right? Or it really isn't that bad. It just isn't that bad, right? How does that look personally? How might that look personally? Well, my credit card debt is really not that bad. And we kind of try to compare it to somebody else's and say, well, I'm not as bad as that one, right? It's really not that bad. Or we go to the doctor and the doctor says, here's your cholesterol count, or here's your blood pressure. And we go, well, it could be worse. It's really not that bad. Or in our relationship, is there really distance I'm feeling? Oh no, it's really not that. It just must be the stress going on in our lives. So he says, they sabotage our effort to be able to make the change that could lead us in that positive path, could lead us to experience a greater sense of joy and well-being and peace and harmony. A second saboteur, he says, is dread and dissolution. So we are paying attention, but then we feel stuck because it seems so massive. We look at that debt, or we look at where we've gotten in our lack of taking care of ourselves during COVID or whatever. We look at it and we go, oh my gosh, it's so bad. And so dread and disillusion, we feel overwhelmed, or we look at the world. We feel, what the heck? What can I do? What difference is it really going to make if this family of mine recycles, right? I don't know if you ever my daughter is the environmental police in my home. We have in our trash thing, a divider thing in our pull-out, trash. And I still don't know every single piece that's recyclable or not. But I'll tell you, at least once or twice, maybe even 3 times a week, Jennifer, because she knows these things, will say to me, Mom, that goes in recycling, or Mom, that goes into composting. I'm picking one example. I'm picking one example because sometimes my mind will go to, does it really make a difference? Because it can seem like it's so massive, right? And yet, if in the massiveness of the problem, each of us is consistently doing the pieces that we know we can do, it is going to make a difference. It is going to make a difference. The third saboteur, he says, is sometimes it gets to such an extreme that some people just have a lack of desire to be anymore and will take extreme measures, will take their own lives if they feel so desperate. I remember once hearing somebody say that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And so we mustn't turn away. And I deeply believe that we in this teaching, as much, if not more than anyone, needs to not look away. We need to look squarely. We need to keep learning about whatever the matters are, both in our personal life, but especially in our world, to be as informed as we can be about that issue or two that breaks our heart open, to be as informed as we can be, aware of what exists now, how did we get where we are, and then most importantly, what can I do? What can you do? Realizing it's not up to us to do it all. There are prophetic voices in our world today now, trying to point the way to us and get our attention about issues and matters that we've got to tend to, that some of which are very time-sensitive and critical. In the same way, if you read the Bible, if you read not just the New Testament, but you read the Old Testament, there is a prophetic voice in the Old Testament that again and again and again was trying to educate and warn and inform the Israelites of harm in their way. And without fail, when the prophetic voice was listened to, the path was easier and the result was better. When the prophetic voice was not listened to, the path was harder and the results were much more negative. Listening to what needs to be tended to look at what is demanding our attention, to look at it both personally and collectively. What do I need to see? Where do I need to be informed? What changes do I need to make in my life, in my lifestyle, for myself, for my family, for my community? In The Hope, Harvey says that there are 7 world situations we need to be paying attention to. I'm just going to mention them to you. I'm not going to take the time to go over them. But these are 7 that he identifies as crucial for some of our human family to be actively working on. The environment, the devastation of our environment, our growing population to a point where if it doesn't get curtailed, it's not going to be sustainable. This is one that bothers me deeply, the growth of fundamentalism and rigidity in religion. He says nuclear proliferation. The 5th one, our technological worldview. The 6th one, the corporate mindset, where money is more important than anything. We're starting to hear changes about many of these things, which is good. And our hectic pace of life. You probably found yourself in one of those 7 where you feel like your heart breaks open around that particular area more than the others. The worst thing I think we can do besides not taking action at all, and besides being apathetic about it, is to say, well, my issue is more important than yours. and to find fault with somebody else or some other group or some other organization that's doing their part around a particular piece of the puzzle or the challenge. But what I also appreciate about what Harvey has written throughout the book is that while there's much to be concerned about that we need to be willing to look at, while there is that, there is also much to take hope in. There is much to also be informed in terms of change that's happening, in terms of a new birth that is happening. Think for a moment about the evolution of any animal species. I'm sure you remember learning about some of this even in elementary school. And you know that that evolution took a long, long, long time, right? A very long time. And any little creature in the middle of that process of that long expanse of time didn't experience or didn't know, if it could have known, that change was happening. There are so many who are deeply involved in spiritual work who say the same thing is happening to human consciousness, that human consciousness is evolving, that for all the very real challenges and problems we have in the world, at the same time, there is an undercurrent of growth among some, and that some is increasing in terms of the evolution of consciousness. The consciousness that recognizes our interconnectedness with each other. The consciousness that recognizes there is something more than just this physical form we call our individual lives. The consciousness that recognizes that no matter what we might call it, there is a force or an impetus toward life and toward improvement. In his book, Harvey identifies 7. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I want to mention a few of what he calls evidence of a new birth happening. He says, number 1, the crisis itself and the response that we are seeing to the crises. Is that the way to say that, in the world? He said, there are so many more people and organizations on the planet today taking up the issue of sustainability, taking up the issue of social justice. Paul Hawkins wrote a book, Blessed Unrest, and the book is a number of years old now, so I don't know how many more organizations there are. But in his book, he set out to find just how many progressive movements had been sparked by the growing disasters in the world. And what he found at that point in time, which I believe is at least 10 years ago, that there are between 1 and 2 million organizations now actively working toward ecological sustainability and social justice. That's phenomenal, isn't it? That's phenomenal. That's each little person going, put it in the recycling bin, doing their little tiny part, and some doing a much bigger part than the little tiny part. He says evidence of the new birth is the new technologies that are evolving and surfacing in all the realms of science, whether it's astrophysics or genetics or stem cell research. We are living at an incredibly fast pace in terms of the doubling of knowledge. And yes, that knowledge can be used to harm, but it can also be used for great advances. I don't know how you feel about this, but I was deeply inspired at the beginning of the pandemic when we heard from the scientific prophets how long it would take for a vaccine to be found or created. And they all worked so hard and broke, I believe, all sorts of records. And we are the recipients of that amazing speed of technology. That ought to give us a sense of hope. What's inspiring to me too is that more and more I'm reading about scientists who have a deep spiritual understanding, not religious, but some sort of spiritual understanding. And maybe that's birthed out of the awareness that the deeper you go into the microcosm or the vaster you go into the macrocosm, you hit something that is the supreme mystery of life, and you're left with, gotta be something more. Got to be something more to it. Harvey talks about the democratizing of media, of the explosion of the internet. Now, we've seen how it can be used in a harmful way, but look at the way it can be used to connect us, to connect people with resources that can make a difference, to connect minds and hearts. Look at how many people jump in and get engaged when there is a disaster or a dilemma, either saying, I'll show up and do what I can, or I'll write a check because right now that's all I can do, but my heart is open and I care. If we didn't have that information that quickly, could we respond that quickly? There's one answer. No. No, we couldn't. So there's much to take hope in. He identifies the mystical renaissance. Have you noticed how spirituality is much more talked about today? Not just here, but people don't shy away from that word as much as they used to. People are finding their own path to a spiritual understanding. All of the world's sacred texts are available at our fingertips, free of charge, to any one of us. To any one of us. That wasn't always that way. We didn't always have the opportunity to tap into the depths of sacred understanding and philosophy and wisdom that we have today. And the last that I'll mention is he writes about the resurgence or the appreciation of the divine feminine. I think about the conference that I was invited to speak at, I think it's probably 4 or 5 years ago now, in Tokyo, Japan. The Goi Peace Foundation had a conference on sparking the divine feminine. And it wasn't just women talking about it. It was men and women from all fields, from political fields to governance, to science, to authors, to actuary type people, to spiritual people, talking about the divine feminine, meaning not masculine or feminine, not male or female, but that more intuitive sense that resides in each of us, that more open side that resides in each of us, that side or that quality that says it's not just about the bottom line, it's about the whole thing. That part of us that seeks to nurture, that seeks to cultivate, that seeks to birth something good. So I began with the title I gave this talk, The Courage to Look, the Inspiration to Change. And I want to bring it back as I close this with the invitation for us to look in two places, to look in our own lives. Where do you need courage to look at something in your own life or your own family that maybe isn't working real well? And if there's something like that in your family life, in your personal life, your health, your finances, your relationship, that's not working, spend some time and be as courageous as you can to look and name it, whatever it is, and then to be inspired to take whatever action to begin to work at correcting that or healing that or fixing that. But to have the courage to look and the inspiration to change, not just for yourself, because it really is about both parts of this mission. It's about our own inner work and our own transformation, but it's also about we're part of something bigger. We're part of a human family, not just a family that looks like us in this room, but the family that we're beginning to see reflected a little bit more fairly in our television commercials and on our television now than ever before. But it's even broader than that. And so will we have the courage to look? And will we have the inspiration to change? And to do that means we have to stay informed and connected and open. Namaste.